And we're live. Hello, everyone. Surprise, none of the people in the promo are on tonight. We like to mix things up. They will join us another night. And thank you, London, for jumping in. Thank you, Richard, for joining me for this conversation. It's going to be kind of heavy. There's a lot going on in the chapters that that we're reading for this week. There were 4 chapters. For those of you who are following along, we read chapters 6 through 9. And these 4 chapters sort of show the acceleration of caste. One of the chapters really talks about how that worked under Nazi Germany. And so I put all of this under the theme of the acceleration, because it kind of starts with taking away humanity in chapter 6, and then in chapter 8 we talk about Nazis, and then in chapter 9 sort of closing out the section with lynching in America. So you're in for kind of a deep, could be uncomfortable conversation for a lot of people. If you're reading along, then you see where Isabel Wilkerson is going with all of it, and then next week we'll start on the actual pillars that she pulls apart, the 8 different things that that in her mind kind of make up caste in general. So today we're talking about the acceleration of caste. I'll just put up chapter 6, and obviously if you're online and you're following along, please comment as we go if you have questions, or you want to include anything. I guess we can just jump right in. Chapter 6 is called The Measure of Humanity, and this chapter kind of tries to outline what caste and racism are, how they're applied to humanity, and how we measure things. And the first analogy that she pulls up is this short versus tall. And this is kind of, it kind of reminds me of that experiment with the blue eyes and the brown eye children. She just talks about, something that you're born with that you have no control over being used to categorize you. And I wanted to ask you, Richard, because you're a tall human. Did this resonate with you? Because this is something I mean, I'm shorter than you because you're 6'4", but there are obviously people in our lives who are shorter, and you're one of the taller humans that I know. So I wanted to ask, this is something that applies to you. So is there something that you, especially as a white person, but as a tall person, how did you feel reading this section?
Well, I could relate to how ludicrous it was, using such a, in my mind, that's how I felt. And it was, I don't know. I just, yeah, it felt sort of strange. I admit, to sort of define, tallness when she was describing it as being tall would be negative, Langley, and started using descriptors of what tall means in this fantasy, and then comparing it to the shorts, and that they had guns and weapons and those kinds of things. And so it did feel, like this is unreal. This is unreal. This can't be, using physical characteristics to separate people. But I knew as I was reading it, that's exactly what we've done in our society. So it did give me her point was well received. I mean, I got what she was trying to say there.
I think it was good. It was good that she made it a point to say, like you're saying, the tall was a negative. Because even like, right, even in our society, you think of tall people as somehow having like some kind of advantage over everyone else. But then the negative thoughts or the negative behavior people have towards you if you're tall, and then you don't meet their expectations of what kind of athlete you are, how coordinated you are, like all of those things also go along with it. So it was interesting to see kind of like that back and forth. London, what do you think?
No, I think it is wild how we categorize people, and we use so many different things to put them into this box. And that's how now, it's almost we automatically formulate an opinion even if we never even met a person, but just because we might see that person, we start to make assumptions. I know I get it all the time as well. When people see me, and I'm not as tall as Richard, but I'm only like 6'1", but I'm a big guy. Yeah, I'm like 250. Right. So when people see me, the first thing they say is, "Oh, he's intimidating," and they don't know me. They just assume that I'm intimidating, that I can break bricks with my bare hands and stuff like that. Like it's just it's crazy. And then that thing sticks with them until they actually meet me. And I think that's the whole thing. In a nutshell. Why we deal with the issues that we deal with in America, and just like was talking about in the book, it's our level of curiosity hasn't gotten to the point where we want to have these conversations with people to find out who they really are. We just want to stand back at a distance and assume, and I think that's the dangerous part of doing that.
Yeah, Sally has a good comment here about the idea that nothing that we're talking about, whether it's, tall versus short, but also eye color of your skin, that none of it is based in science. And so that's one of the points that she's trying to drive home, obviously, is that idea. Like, we're making all of these decisions, and I'm giving you like this weird example of what it would be like, and the eye color one that was done with the kids. And I've seen the follow-up to I keep forgetting her name, Dr. Jill, with adults, and how adults react to some of those arbitrary categories that she puts people in, and the way they react emotionally to it, and how sensitive they are to being called one thing or another. The kids are they fell in line, but with adults, it's like, none of this means anything. Yeah. And you're still reacting that way, and you don't want to be in that category, because she went back and forth, short and tall. So, well, what if it's like this? What if you're in the tall category and it's negative? What if you're in the short category and you have all these weapons? Like, where do you want to be? And obviously we all want to be on the winning team, right? Richard, was it kind of strange? I'm going to call you out because you're the only white guy here. Was it like, did it feel personal? Did you feel attacked?
Yeah. Yeah, it felt personal on not so much about me, but I as I was reading that, I did think of my family. And I've got 11 brothers and sisters, and they're all tall. And it felt real in that sense. Like, I just thought of them as I was reading through that. Like, what if that was the characteristic? What if? And then I became sort of defensive about my whole family, all 11 brothers and sisters. I didn't want to, because I know it was just sort of this, let me give you an example. And yeah. And so yes, I did feel sort of attacked, but.
Okay. Well, I just dropped an earring. These hoops. Maybe I'm going to get in a fight later. I lost a hoop. So then this, hey, you never know. We might have to scrap. Okay. So this Caucasian label that was applied based on what they said was science at the time, right? The idea of looking at skulls and categorizing them in a certain way, and then someone just randomly picks one and says, this is the best one. And we decide that all the white people have this type of skull, so we're the best and we're stealing this name because it's not even what it meant at the time. So we're starting to label people according to arbitrary categories. But then let's talk about this for a minute. Accepting the illogic of race, because these are the things that we have been told. And I think all of the conversations that we've had, starting in March with So You Want to Talk About Race, all the conversations that people have on TV, if they're with like-minded people, if they're arguing with people who don't think like them. Some of us want to argue against the kind of education that's happening, right? The kind of textbooks that we're choosing to use, the kinds of stories that are being told. I think all of us are kind of in that education space, or at least we want to be training and workshopping with people, but also educating them. What are some things, and London, I'll start with you. When you read something like this, is this like, I've heard this so many times, I've talked about this so many times. How do you feel as I'm beginning to like set this up, like, oh, we need to keep talking about this?
No, I think it's important. Like I said, we accept the logic of race because these are the things that we've been told. And like we were just saying, there's no proof. There's absolutely no proof. You get a bunch of people that has their own agenda, and they push it. And the first thing that they try to do is change the narrative. They try to change the way people think or perceive about other people. And what I've realized, in my in my short time here on Earth, is that a lot of people they're truly lazy in regards to learning. They want to be force-fed. They want to be told what to believe so that they can just be they're not held accountable. Because then the first person you blame it on is the person that taught you. Well, they taught me this. And so now they're indoctrinated and they feel as though that they can't go backwards. And I think that's a pride thing, of feeling that they can't turn around. They don't want to change. They just want to keep up with whatever they've been told. And it ends up being a fear to step out of that, box, to step out of that place where you've been told what to believe for so long, that now you have to actually go and find proof of what folks have told you. And it's the same situation that we've all been a part of. It's just like you're told one thing about a set group of people, but then when you really get out there and start to talk to folks, you realize that all that stuff that you were taught was a lie, was a total lie. When you really start to look deep into history and see things that were done based on what you've been told, things that actually happened, you realize a lot of the stuff you were lied to about. But people don't. It seems like people would rather hold on to this lie than to actually change the course of a world or a nation, whatever's being affected. They would rather hold on to that lie than to actually see change, because they've gotten so comfortable. They've gotten so comfortable with it, and it seems like these lies absolve them of all responsibility to actually change.
It's like that argument about, my family didn't have enslaved people,
Mm-hmm.
And it's like ignoring the fact that it happened. We can't even have the conversation that this happened. We can't even talk about how now or now we know that some things that we thought were true 20, 40 years ago are not true. And that there's a reason that some of this stuff is either hidden or not discussed. Richard, did you want to? We lost you for a minute there.
Yeah, sorry about that. I've been having internet issues. I think it's the smoke in the valley.
Yeah.
But yes, as I was sitting here thinking about, I've heard in my lifetime about lynchings. I've heard about these things. I think what Wilkerson does a great job is really providing the scene for the lynching, so that it was so emotional to read it, and I was so overwhelmingly embarrassed that I didn't really truly understand the term lynching. And to the level of which she described, and people laying claim to fingers and toes and things like that as souvenirs, and so I think, had I really been truly told as I was growing up, in school, and we had discussions about it, and it was brought to that level, I don't think that would have been something that you would forget as a child. And so we only got to learn about, Christopher Columbus and the things we were told about Europeans being superior and coming over here as explorers, and that kind of thing. And so I just feel like, in this, and I can't describe it. I'm going to think of a better word later, but this sense of embarrassment about my lack of understanding as I'm reading this book.
Okay, so let's talk about then. Let me see. I think Sally had a comment about. Well, we're saying this already, but it's true. She's also an educator, so. I feel like the only things that we can really do when we're in these kinds of positions is to do better once you know better, right? So let's follow Maya Angelou's advice. So there's a difference between caste and racism, and I think, there's always opportunity to conflate things like this because they sort of build on each other. It's almost like you can't have one without the other, but you kind of have to understand. The reason she wrote this book was for us to understand that it all stems from caste, that the racism flows out of the systems that have been created by the caste system. And we defined caste last week. I'm going to pull this up. We'll talk about that first. So caste is insidious and powerful because it's not hatred, and it is not necessarily personal. This is all about the systems that are in place. And racism falls into that, right? This systemic racism. It wouldn't exist if there wasn't this hierarchy built into the creation of this nation. And that's a difficult thing to discuss, and we can't get too deep because we're not doing the research. We're going off of what's in this particular book, but I feel like we know that these things exist. And then when we define racism in this way, so it's often reduced to a feeling, a character flaw, and it's conflated with prejudice connected to whether someone is good or bad. And that's personal, right? So there's a non-personal system that exists in caste that is by nature insidious, and then racism flows out of it. This is kind of a big, it's not theoretical, this exists. We're going to talk about it because it exists the way that it exists. Do either of you want to kind of tackle one or both of these? I know it's not easy, but no.
no. I was gonna say no. I think they are definitely connected, because with the caste system, it's who those in power will feel, or what set group of people would say, we are the best, in a sense. And then once that is established, how it was back in, with slaves being, Africans being kidnapped over here and forced into slavery, when when you think historically of how it happened, and you had indentured servants and all that stuff going on, and these different groups of individuals, regardless of where they were from, they were enslaved or indentured servants together. And then once realizing that this thing could make a whole lot of money, and how in the world do we stop them from working together, and then kind of almost like they made us turn against one another. What you had then was that hierarchy being established. And so once they said, okay, we're going to coin the term white, and everybody that's non-white, you go over here, and everybody that's white, you come hang with us. You had a decision to make at that point. And it was like, now what do I do? Because now I've been put up on this pedestal. I've been told that I am the supreme group of people, and now I have a choice to make. And the choice was to basically erect this this constitution, or these rules that didn't benefit anybody except whites. And so now what you're looking at the whole caste system plus racism all intertwined, and this is what we're dealing with and still dealing with today. So it came out of a place where folks felt that they needed to be over a set group of people, whatever it might have been, just like even with Hitler, whatever it might have been, because you pissed off because you lost the war, so you want to blame it on somebody. And now you're saying that these are the people that are beneath us. And once you start spewing that stuff, and you start, you take away the truth and the facts from people, and you're making them believe, you're basically, like we said, spoon feeding them these lies, then they're susceptible to believe anything. And to even of that race, of the white race, will start to view themselves as supreme, because well, they told me I am. Mm-hmm. I don't know what makes me this, but maybe my skin color, my eyes, my hair, and then next thing you know, we have this system that we live in today.
Yeah, and thanks for using the word supreme, because it's the words themselves are never really talked about or highlighted, but white supremacy is what we're talking about. And that because the caste system was created the way that it was, that's where white supremacy comes out of that. Richard, do you want to add anything?
I'm trying to rationalize through the differences between races and caste. And Letty, you had mentioned, and I'd heard this term before, systematic racism. Is systematic racism the caste in our discussion?
Well, so systemic racism, the idea that there are systems in place specifically to target controlling or making subhumans, keeping that subordinate caste level down where it is built out of caste. None of this would exist. I mean, I think that's the structure, is that the caste system, the way that they decided who was on top based on skin color. So race became a thing, and then they decided that based on race, the white people were on top. So that had to be created for then this country to be built in such a way that all of the other systems, economic, education, like all of that, policing, all of these systems grew out of that. I think that's, and it's a big idea, and this is all like in one chapter because there's so much more to talk about. But these are huge systems in place, and I think that because we think of like our economic system, the banking system, we don't think of it necessarily. When you think of a bank, the first thing that I think of is not racist, but that doesn't mean that it isn't. I just haven't experienced that necessarily, right? But then when you start looking at it, you look at the numbers, people have done research on this, you really start looking at the way that loans, mortgages, the systems themselves, accounts, the way that they've been approved or not approved over time since the creation of like the treasury or whatever, they're systemically racist. They're built to benefit the upper caste. So it wouldn't exist without the caste system. And so that's why this book is so important. I think that's why some people don't want to dive into the topic, because it's like, caste, that's like, no, that used to exist in India. That I don't even think that people look at the word and think Nazi Germany. Like that, you don't really associate it. You just think the Holocaust. But I feel like we don't talk about caste when we talk about Nazi Germany, in my opinion.
And I think about the experience. I think about the experience that I had at a local board meeting when the board member said that comment of, I'm all for diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it seems to me they want to leap ahead. And he said that at the board meeting, and I was online listening to it, and I about fell out of my chair. And I just thought,
An elected official.
but then that's looking at caste and saying, you're not to jump around me or jump over me. You're not going to, and I just thought that has no freaking clue. And it's an elected official. And so,
so here's sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to pull up Natalie Wall here saying, just like the comment before about how we're accustomed to what we're told. And no matter how illogical we think it is, I mean, I think we kind of understand that the systems are built to benefit certain people. And then those people call us crazy because they had to work so hard, that it's not their fault that they got the job or got the loan or got into that college or whatever. But when you really start looking at it and doing the research, which some people still argue against because they think all facts are manufactured, it's hard to have a conversation about what this really means and how things can't really change until we at least agree that this is fact, like this is actually how our country is built. It's difficult, and I'm going to move on in a couple minutes, but I wanted to ask if there was anything. I'm going to put the racism thing back up. This idea about good or bad people. Would you say then, like in that board meeting, did anybody speak up when that trustee made that comment about them wanting to? It's a public meeting, right?
But him making that comment means the ignorance of what's going on in his head. Like, he doesn't understand. He thinks he's a good person and he's supporting our DEI initiative. And look at me, but as you talk, it feels like you want to jump ahead of me. And he's thinking to himself, like, I worked hard to get where I'm at and to be sitting in this chair and those kinds of things. And so you've got to wonder, how do you, I mean, I don't even.
Though?
No, I'm saying you should call. Go ahead. What?
Well, because you're saying like his ignorance of thinking that he's got something important to say. He's thinking that way, and you're calling it ignorance.
I don't. I don't.
You're giving him a lot of leeway.
Well, and the fact that maybe I heard it. I know what I heard. And it was hard to tell because I was on a Zoom board meeting, what was being said around or what reaction was taking place when he said that. If any, I've not heard anybody talk about it, and I brought it up with a couple of colleagues. In this, I don't want to, and so do you call people out and what happens at that moment would have been very important to call that out, because that's an educating moment for a board member who has some supremacy issues.
London? you have thoughts?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, no, I would say, is it ignorance or is it his quest to hold on to power? I think that's a question to be asked too. It's just like with slavery and the church. You had a lot of slaves converting into Christianity or Catholicism at that time, and the the issue was then, well, if they do convert, then that means we look at them as equal, as brothers and sisters in the Lord.
Mhm.
Yet they said, well, that's right and all, but they're still savages. God saves the soul, not the body. Keep slavery pushing. And that's exactly what they did to justify staying in power and keeping people in subjection under them. So that's what I'm saying. Is it ignorance or is it a fight to stay on top? And I think what we're seeing a lot of now is a fight to stay on top, because they see that they're losing power, and when they do lose power, I mean, it's going to wreck their whole world, because then they're going to even start questioning themselves. Did I really get that job because I was the most qualified? Did I get that? Did I get that position?
Imagine
so
that.
yeah. So and I think that's the biggest thing, is disrupt, basically tear down the system that's still in place. And the only way we can do that is by people to be truly educated and free in their thinking in regards to what has happened in the past and what we need to do now to move forward and to dismantle the system.
So then Natalie adds to her comment about it being conscious or subconscious. And I think that for like a trustee sitting on a board for a community college district, and this could be anywhere, I think I have the most problem with it, because he's not really talking about himself. He's talking about white students or exceptional students, or you know what I mean? Like, so he's saying we can't make this decision in this way because it's going to impact this group of students. So in that case, he's thinking about himself, but he's really thinking like, I'm here to protect like this, like I'm here to work for this group. And so that's how I see something like that. When you have an elected official who says DEI is fine and all, but they. So why are you saying they if you're supposed to be there for all students? Who's the they that wants more than they're supposed to be getting? So that, I mean, and I think a lot of us say like that we just can't deal with that crap anymore. And we want other people to speak up. So that would have been a moment where, if I said something, then I already have a reputation around here. But if I said something, it would be, like the loud Latina, oh, there she goes again. And it would be like the same voice speaking out. So it has to be more people. And this is where, then students get up and they protest and then they get in trouble. Right. So that's that vicious cycle. Okay, there's a lot of comments, but I feel like we're repeating a lot of stuff. So any other comments on this? There's always so much to say. Okay, I'm going to transition a little bit then, because we have to get through 4 chapters, and we are doing a book discussion. So we're going to move on to India. Chapter 7, there's a lot of comparison between the Dalits of India and African Americans in America. And so this is, coming into India and experiencing kind of like what we talked about in chapter 3, when we talked about Martin Luther King Jr. visiting. She has similar things to say, but this idea that these groups of people are living with codes of subordination. Slavery is not, doesn't exist or at least isn't codified in America anymore. It's called, mass incarceration now. And then in India, the Dalits, even though that caste system hasn't existed officially since the 1950s, they're still living with some of the things that have been coded into their culture. And so they still have the menial jobs. They still, can't live in certain neighborhoods. They're still looked upon in this way. So can you think a little bit about what this means, this living with the codes of subordination? And do you have examples in like your workplaces maybe? Or I always say this, and I know that sometimes the examples are the same every time, but I think London, I think you had said something recent the last time you and I talked about, I don't know, pick something, I guess. Could be anything. Something happened today.
Nothing today, but no, I think we do. I think it's that historic trauma that's just passed on, and it is kind of coded into our DNA from what we've been taught, what our what our ancestors have seen, and then what has been shown to us. It's easy to say, "Hey, you guys are free now. Everything is okay," but when you're not actually pointed into the direction of freedom and said, "Hey, it's over here. We're giving everybody a chance," then regardless of what people might say, you're not going to necessarily feel free. You're not going to necessarily feel like things have changed. It's just like, I remember having, conversations with my dad, who dealt with that, type of, segregation in the South. And, I realized, and I, saw things and heard things that he did. It's just like, oh, okay, when a white person is coming towards you, like, your head is kind of down, or, you kind of step off and give them the sidewalk. And I've seen it. I've done it myself. And just, kind of stepped on the grass and let them have the sidewalk. Then one day I was like, nah, I ain't doing that no more. Either we going head up and I'm gonna run into you, or or you gonna give up the sidewalk. But I realized a lot of the things, it was based off of a lot of historic trauma, and the things that I've heard from my family, from my father, my grandfather, my grandmother, all my greats, the things that I've experienced, even in the 80s, the 90s, when I was in school and college and things like that, that I sit there and I say, okay, have we really moved past it, and why do I still feel like I'm subordinate? It's the same way, Martin Luther King said it. It's like you telling me, hey, grab yourself up, by your bootstraps. It's like you have no boots or straps. So it's like, how do you tell me that I'm free and that I get to experience the exact same thing as you now, those that are the in the supremacists? Like, how do I get to experience that now when you're definitely not giving me any room to grow or experience those things? I'm gonna always revert back to what history has said about me and my people. I'm always going to do that. And I think that's what you see in a lot of areas, especially underserved areas. You see, it's like, well, if we are free, then why do things look like this? Mm-hmm. If we are free, why do things look like that? You're telling me that, oh, I'm given and I'm afforded the same opportunity as everybody else, but why does my school look jacked up and I can go, 20 miles down the road and everything is nice and pristine there? It's like, these are things that traumatize communities, and they feel hopeless at times. So I think it stays, that living with those codes of subordination. I think it stays with you until you actually see a change, and you actually see things actually working out for the good of those that have been underserved.
Yes, and when it's codified, like in policing or in housing or in education, like you're saying, the way that that property tax works to well, in California, to benefit schools, like that system clearly broken. Taxing people who don't have anything to tax. And then you're saying that that's the, okay, we're not going to get into that, but these are things that are just, they're coded into the system. And so Richard, kind of, when we talk about that systemic racism, that's kind of what we're saying, that it's built in, and that those are the things you have to fight, like the policies, the laws. Sally makes a comment here, Dallas believe they deserve the menialness of life. And this is a great segue to the next thing I pulled from the chapter. It's kind of what you're saying a little bit, London, about how we view ourselves and how we deal with that. Because she says, the author says, I love this. So in the caste system, conflating compliance with approval can be dehumanizing in itself. Sort of like the whole idea that you're happy with your lot in life, or you're accepting of it, or that's as high as you can go because somebody said, or because the code said. And so you're complying with that in whatever reason, right? Housing, again, education, and all the different ways that we run a society. That in itself, saying, well, you're happy with what you have, right? Like they're happy with what they have, or be happy with what you have. And that's like the dehumanizing part of it. Does that make sense?
I've heard people say that, white people make that comment that, you know, that some slaves, you know, were, when they were free, didn't know what to do because they loved their masters. Their masters treated them well. And it was like making up this, like, see, they're really happy. Why are you destroying this? And it's just like, oh my God, like, and this is somebody making up the excuse today, you know, saying this is what happened, you know. You didn't read the right book because, you know, there were the majority of the slaves out there were perfectly happy because their masters treated them well.
But I also see this as a, like, you know, 2021 issue when we're talking about minimum wage. Like, who deserves what wage?
You're right. Good point.
And who's arguing? Like, lower middle class arguing about whether or not somebody flipping burgers should get $15 an hour, when we all know that's not enough to live off of and buy a house and raise your kids. You know, it's like, what? So this idea that there's a minimum wage, and that I'm just using that as an example. To me, that was one of the things that I thought of when I saw it. It's like no, if we all agree that minimum wage should be, what is it now, $11 in California, $12 in California, if we're all agreeing that that's the minimum that you need to survive, then everyone's fine, right? We all agreed on it. We voted, and then we're supposed to accept. I mean, what do you do besides rise up? Everybody rise up. No. Let me see here. I mean, yeah. This could be, like we said, this could be like a whole class just on this. The comparison of the Dalits and African Americans in America. But we're going to move on because we're running out of time, but also because we want to talk about dirtbag Nazis. That's like a big, my friend Sarah Wilson coined that term when we were working on anti-racism curriculum, and we were building some of these courses, or some of the lessons on this, using this book also, and dirtbag Nazis was kind of what we were talking about. So dirtbag Nazis and the acceleration of caste. And obviously this happened very quickly in terms of the history of our nation, but also just like the history of civilized European nations. It happened fairly quickly once they made a decision what they were going to do. And they made these decisions, and they were called the Nuremberg Laws. And it took them a while to come up with exactly what the plan was going to be. And reading this chapter was, it was educational. And in the same way, for me, in the same way that I feel like we don't talk enough or force ourselves to think about enough how horrific the enslavement of people is, that we don't consider how horrific the Holocaust was, even when we see the pictures, even because I don't think that we're thinking about what it took to make those decisions in the first place. Okay. This is how I feel about it. I don't know if either of you have any idea. This chapter lays it out pretty, it's factual, but it feels gruesome. It's like a horror movie. When you hear the villains talking about how they're going to do so, maybe it's more like a serial killer kind of a thing. I don't know. It's awful. But they brought all of that, what was it, like 15 people into a room, and they were saying, how do we do this? And so this historian is quoted in the book, in debating how to institutionalize racism in the Third Reich, they began by asking how Americans did it. I feel like in America, we don't want to think about this. Nobody wants to admit it. It's like one thing to acknowledge that there was slavery, and then it's another thing to say that in the late 1930s, Hitler and his people were looking to America for ideas on how to take over the world. Do you have thoughts that you want to share live and in public?
I just, and I think it was London that said a couple, maybe when we were reading the other book, that said, that Nazi Germany modeled their effort after after America. And I heard him say that, and I thought, what? So I went looking like after that, and really couldn't find, on the internet search, those kinds of things to say. And I believed you, but I just thought, wait a minute, I'm gonna have. And then when I read this chapter, I was like, oh my God, like this really happened. This isn't. And looking to, but then not even wanting to say, well, but we're not going to adopt it totally because it was so egregious. Even us Germans, we're not going to accept, the whole mess. And I think she talks about, they didn't sell souvenirs in Nazi Germany, about their effort.
But there's this. They came to the US because we were centuries ahead in our thinking with race-based immigration bans and anti-miscegenation statutes. So it's like, oh, they're the experts. Let's go see how they're doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awful.
It's crazy because we wrote it in the law. Yeah. We wrote it in the law. We were the pioneers of it. America was the pioneers of it. We wrote it in the law. We, from the Constitution to Jim Crow to all these different codes, and from slave codes, black codes to you name it. We America was the model to pin these things into law, and Nazi Germany followed our lead. Hitler was just so pissed off at the Jews that he wanted them exterminated. You think about what could have happened to everyone that was enslaved if somebody just had a wild hair and was like, hey, you know what? Let's kill them all.
Yeah.
We don't think about that. Like what else could have happened? I mean, they kidnapped, they enslaved. I mean, like we don't even know the atrocities that were actually done to enslaved people while being over here. We don't know. We don't know how many we've lost. We don't know. We paint this picture that, hey, slavery was, and then it ended. But we don't think about the. I mean, you could think about the slave ships and how many we lost on ships, but just coming into this land and being treated and separated, and we don't think about that, because here's the thing: we did bad as long as we're not Nazi Germany. That's exactly how America thinks. Yeah, we were bad, but we're not Nazi Germany. Yeah, we kind of, yeah, we are, because we were their model. We were their model.
Yeah, I don't think people know that or don't want to acknowledge it, or maybe it's like just something that somebody read somewhere and it can be easily explained away, or you pretend like it's not factual because, like Natalie says, we're in denial at this. So at the same time, we're acknowledging that this horrific thing happened, and so Hitler and his people, Nazi Germany, was just like this mastermind idea, and they figured all this stuff out, and he's a monster. So then when people say, oh yeah, but he got the idea from the US, I mean, that's where it started. We can't, like, it doesn't compute, because then she also brings this out, which is true. Some people won't even teach it in some districts. Some teachers won't teach it. Sometimes they refuse, or the books don't have as much information in there. And then this part is true, that at least in Germany they acknowledge it. They have markers to point out this happened here. They're constantly being reminded. There, things in place in their country that remind people. They don't pretend it didn't happen, right? Because let me see. Oh yeah, Pat says, so what are we saying? It won't ever happen again? And so that's like, oh well, if it didn't happen, if we weren't a part of it before, it's not going to happen again. It doesn't exist. It'll happen somewhere else, just like it did in Germany, right?
Yeah, that's what I think. What Natalie, that's a powerful message, because Germany is fighting to never let that happen again. I mean, they're actually, when you put up memorial, I mean, and in our country, we're fighting to make sure that any marker is hidden. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying everyone has to be quiet about it. Like, don't even talk about it. We can't even talk about it.
Because it's all about, the appearance is everything. And, and we got to be the purest of all nations. And so when you talk about slavery and what truly happened, and like London said, we don't even know. We've never done a good job of even trying to research it, to find out what we've got. I think we're skimming the surface when we hear about the atrocities that we do know about. And it's a lot deeper than that.
Yes, like this. So there's always this, like, remember this, remember that. In the US, we're very much about remembering. And she talks about this in the previous chapter, the flower altars that are around, different parts of the city when she landed in Delhi. And how the difference between that, celebrating just for whatever reason, there's some kind of altar to flowers. There's an altar to a person or to a place, or and it's not necessarily the way that we do it in America. There are these memorials, but it's always when there was some kind of a tragedy, right? So it's like, remember, don't forget Columbine, don't forget Sandy Hook, don't forget 9/11. The always remember thing. And I'm not knocking all of that stuff, but we are blinded because they were forced to focus on those things, but then we can't talk about slavery, and we can't talk about the Holocaust, or the U.S. involvement or lack of at the beginning of World War II, to learn and do better and not get caught in that thinking again. And Pat says fear is a dynamic storm, and yes, it usually is about fear, and it's about fear of losing power, right? Like we keep saying. And with that, she does pull out some names. There are obviously way more names that we could add to this list, but these are the people that she pulled out, so I just wanted to put them out. Alexander Graham Bell, Henry Ford, Charles Eliot, who was the president of Harvard at the time. Obviously, President Roosevelt and Herbert Hoover. It was just accepted that some people had differing opinions about how to run the nation, about what was important, about supporting the Nazi Party at the time. And then it's like, oh, well, maybe they didn't know. They knew. You want to have an actual conversation about it. We can't keep giving people a pass and talk about ignorance, because at some point they handed them a pamphlet that said, this is what we believe in. And you said, okay, sounds good, right? This is still happening today. This is just happens to be World War II, but it's still happening today. But then I wanted to highlight, I don't want to say highlight because screw this guy, but Madison Grant, eugenicist from New York, wrote The Passing of the Great Race. And Hitler sent him a note thanking him, saying it was a great work of art and that it was his Bible. He was really impressed by this guy's ideas. I feel gross talking about this. So this is the sort of the crux of this chapter, is that the Nazis were impressed by the American custom of lynching its subordinate caste of African Americans, having become aware of the ritual torture and mutilations that typically accompanied them. So it's all about the most destruction against this vast number of people in their way in Europe. But there's no way they would have stopped at Europe. Thoughts about this? I feel like
Now, I think that quote right there says it. What we try to cover up about the atrocities that were done here, says having become of the ritual torture and mutilations that typically accompanied the lynchings.
Yeah.
There you have it. Like we don't know. We haven't even scratched the surface, because America still wants to appear that their hands were clean, that we wasn't as bad as the Nazis. But we don't know. And that's terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, because what has been recorded is so horrific. And even when we see the pictures and we hear the accounts, it's still like, oh, that was then. I mean, we're not even talking at this point about the beginning of this country or even before, like the last week we're talking about the creation of the country and going back centuries. This is decades. This is not centuries.
Yeah.
So we impressed the Nazis with our system. But then, at the end of the chapter, she wraps it up and talks about how they couldn't abide by this rule, because for them, the one-drop rule, she explains, for the Nazis, went too far, because to them, someone who looks white should benefit from being in that category, from being part of that caste, the level of caste, because they believed in their supremacy. This was too far. The one-drop rule in America, was one drop of blood coursing through your veins was enough to take you out of that highest level of caste. But for the Nazis, they broke it down, and they went by how many grandparents on either side, and if you look white and you met this cat, then you could still benefit from the way we created this system. So when it came down to it, they liked the way we set up our system. They liked our racist rules and laws. They liked the way that we tortured and mutilated our lowest caste, and then decided that we were too harsh, that America took it too far for the Nazis. Any comment? There's
that one drop
Yeah.
rule was I mean, that was that the one drop. Even I was talking to someone regarding that one drop rule from the Israeli consulate before, and they said that was the factor of if you were going to the gas house as well. But what they also used it as now in free times, what they also use it now is for those, the one drop rule for those that can gain citizenship into Israel. So I mean, they took a negative and made it a positive for those who had ancestry that were affected by the Holocaust.
that
Yeah, it sucks.
Facebook comment here about natives and Thanksgiving, that conveniently leaving out half of the story. We're going to talk about being helped through a harsh winter or setting up for harvest or whatever. And then we're going to stop at the part where, we decimated their tribes and genocide across the country so that, we can move west because we're white. I mean, there's no other reason. This is owed to us. We own this. God said that white Jesus said that we could take over this country.
And there you go. That was it right there. That was part of their call. The church said we can do it. Everybody else is savages. Mm-hmm. And that's like, I don't know if we even look at that. It's like they use scripture to manipulate to the fact that they could go out and kill people and take folks' land. They use scripture, and they put the natives and other people of color, they put us in a category that said we were cursed. And so because of that, we could be killed. We could be taken over.
So many rules that people don't abide by. I mean, if you just follow the rules. So this at the end of this chapter flows into her next, it's like chapter 9 kind of, but it's storytelling on a couple different fronts. The Evil of Silence is what this section is called, and she goes through several different stories of lynching in America, like what you were saying earlier, Richard, about how horrific it was. The idea of having, souvenirs, the idea of auctioning off where you could stand during the actual event, the killing of, could be anybody, mostly Black men. And then the initial story that is about a tree that is in kind of in the way in the road, but instead of getting rid of it or doing something that would benefit the community, they have to leave it because it's the lynching tree. And we can't have this town not have their lynching tree. Or the other stories that talk about just having like a white woman say, this person said or did something to me, and you don't need proof. You're definitely not going to get a trial. But that idea of white women being like the most dangerous for Black men. And this Evil of Silence is about the others, like all the others. When you read through this, the different stories, and they're not, I hate to say they're not surprising, but because we've heard it so, and we've had so many conversations about this, and we've read things, and we're kind of immersing ourselves in the actual history of America. It's still awful to read it, to read the descriptions, to listen to it being read, because I think we're listening and reading at the same time, some of us. It's hard to describe. There's only so many words I can choose to say how awful it is. But if we don't sit in it and hear it and picture it, how do we learn? How do we make things better? How do we change? Do you guys want to add? Either of you want to add anything to this particular, or something else that you've seen or heard?
Well, I did from the book. I think reading about I forget the name of the town, but the town in which they were putting Jews to death, right on the other side of the fence, and ashes falling all over the city. That's an atrocity that we've heard about. That's something we've studied in history, but it's an atrocity, and we can, it's like it's easy to go, those horrible Nazis and horrible Nazis. But then in the book, she presents it right next to stories of slavery or stories of lynching, and moving on and saying, look at your country. This is your country. You don't get to point your finger and say how horrible the Nazis are when you don't even acknowledge what's happening in your own country. And I think that's in the beginning of today. That's the feeling I described of just being ashamed that I didn't take the time to understand what I'm reading right now. Yes, I knew slavery was bad. That's about that's about it. Slavery started and ended in the United States. It was just a real quick blip in the screen, right? But to hear these stories of even after people were, said to be free, that the lynchings were happening, and just the horrible nature of the things that went on that we still don't know about, and there's things that, because of storytelling from ancestors to ancestors, that these stories are coming to light now because people have talked about them. People of color have talked about them. White people have not.
London, did you want to add?
No, I think Richard said it all. I just think, that's the only way we're going to, grow is if we talk about this stuff. I think that's the one thing that I deal with, working in my profession, is that nobody wants to talk about it. So, we still have our own biases and prejudices about people. And we kind of just take what we're given, and we don't want to do our research. We don't want to know the history of why are people so mad at the police. And it's like, oh, we didn't do anything, we're such a great organization. It's like, nah, you gotta go deeper than that. You gotta really look, and it's not even going deeper. It's like, you just gotta look at the facts. What was it for? And I think, unless we continue having these conversations, I don't think our world would get, I don't think it'll get better. I don't think there'll actually be healing unless we have these difficult conversations.
Yes. So this, a little bit like you're talking about, the discomfort, the stories that are left out, that's huge. We have to keep finding the stories and sharing them, and push for that knowledge instead of just saying, oh, that's just a story that somebody read somewhere. But then also in terms of policy changes or laws, this idea of giving the impression of positive change. I think we talk about this a lot in education. We talk about it a lot because on paper, things look like they're moving in the right direction. But then if you really look, if you really ask questions, or you really look at outcomes, or who's benefiting or not benefiting, that's when you really see, like, oh, this is just same shit, different title on it. It happens, with laws. It happens with executive orders from the president. It happens with local ordinances and things like that. It's like we're moving in the right direction because somebody cut a ribbon somewhere. But the truth is that not enough people are able to do the work that is needed to make actual changes. So if we want to be part of this evil of silence, I think that, as we're discussing these things and bringing people in and reading and sharing, we're trying to not be a part of that. And so, right now in this moment at, 8 whatever on a Monday night, that's what we're trying to do, right? Kill that evil of silence. Any other thoughts before we close this out? I don't want to leave everyone with like a big fat bummer, but that's just reality, because this is the last thought for tonight, that even the Nazis did not stoop to selling souvenirs of Auschwitz. So there were no postcards, there were no body parts, there were no little girls watching through the window of a gas chamber, or the labor camps or anything like that. So okay, so I want to say that I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. I feel awful right now. Everyone should just feel awful. Read the book, really think about what's happening in the world and how we're supporting, the right things in our communities, the people in our communities. This is just one way to do it, and hopefully, we're trying to do our part. I have a lot of shout out kind of things that kind of feel trivial right now, but I want to be supportive of these other things. So we'll say last week I brought up with Amy and Mike this show, Exterminate All the Roots, that I've been watching on HBO. Did you see it? Yeah, I'm only like halfway through the second episode, but it's fantastic. I'm learning so much, and feeling all of the crappy things that I'm feeling tonight every time I start the show back up. So informative, really well done. The animations, dramatizations, there's all these things, historical. It's great. I think it's based on a book. I don't know why I didn't look it up before I brought this up, but I'm watching it on HBO. So if you have access to HBO, please watch that. I want to thank our sponsor, Keith Woolridge. I still have books that we can give out to students. He helped us with that because we want people to read. So thank you, Keith. I want to say that next week on the 4th, we will start looking into what Isabel Wilkerson calls the foundations of caste, and we'll go through the first 4 pillars with Angel Mawa. Thank you so much for joining us next week. That'll be next Monday. And then I want to just say that we are in Hispanic Heritage Month, which also gives me like, I want to fight people because we're talking about, where does Hispanic come from? Like, where did that word come from? I am like a third Spanish, so and mostly European and like Mexican. So I have my own issues to deal with this, but the idea that this is supposed to encompass all of Latin America, all of South America and Central America, Mexico. And then we learn, because we need to, what happens when the conquistadors come over, and what happens to all the Afro-Latino people, even in their own countries now, like the Haitians coming over and trying to get in through Mexico. Like this is happening now. Like these things are happening now. And if we're going to be celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, that includes all of the Latin American countries. So there are a lot of Independence Days happening that first week, last week. So we'll bring that up over the next few weeks. And with that, I also want to bring up or share a Latina-owned business, because I love it. It's called Hija de tu Madre, which sounds really bad to a lot of Spanish-speaking people because there are cuss words that go after this, or actually before madre. My mom hates the name of it because it's not good. But I wore a shirt that I bought from them, and I love it so much. It says "Échale ganas," which is like, you know, get off your ass and do something. Tons of shirts, earrings, jewelry, and I wore my little, I don't know if you guys can see it. If you can see it, it is the Virgen de Guadalupe, which is behind me over here. But it's etched into stainless steel, which I love. And it says Hija de tu Madre on the back. So tons of like stuff that really means a lot, I think, to a lot of Latinas who want to kind of like sport their culture. And this is a great month to do that. So this is obviously not sponsored. I mean, she's amazing and has a bunch of great stuff and has a pop-up store in the LA area. So please support her. Any last comments? Okay, a lot of thank yous. Thank you to everybody on Facebook who commented. Go shop at these places that we're shouting out. Thank you, London, for joining and for staying a little bit later. These are hard topics to really dive deep into, and I appreciate everyone chiming in and listening and doing your best. Okay, so we'll see you next Monday. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.